All right, good evening, everybody. Today is Tuesday, November 12th, 2024. I've got 7:04, so I'd like to call this meeting of the Committee of the Whole to order. First, I believe we have some edits to the agenda. President Bowers.
Yes, there's one addition to the agenda this evening. It's we are bringing back, and I apologize, I'm having some computer difficulty this evening, but there's been a request to bring back Ordinance 0066-2024 regarding the authorization to enter into an agreement with Pod Design. And so we would just add that to the agenda at a location at your discretion, Chair.
Perhaps under G, items from the Senior Director of Ops.
Okay.
Does that work? Director Schultz?
Oh,
Under item G, when you do your presentation?
not now, after section G on the agenda.
No, I just wanted to make sure that worked for you. Okay.
He's fine with that, we'll just point.
Okay.
006.
0066.
66. Okay, thank you. All right, so that being taken care of, any other additions or edits to the agenda? Seeing none, we will get started then with items from the Planning Commission, and for that I will turn to Director Blackford. Good evening, Director.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I'm Michael Blackford, Director of Planning, with the unique opportunity tonight to present the first 15 ordinances on tonight's agenda. All these ordinances are related to the zoning code rewrite that was ongoing earlier this year. During that process, staff had many conversations with City Council, and during the adoption of Thanks, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Michael Blackford, Director of Planning. Tonight's agenda items for Planning Commission are related to the zoning code rewrite that was undertaken earlier this year and adopted by Council on April 1st. During those discussions, staff had indicated that the finish line was not adoption of the document. That was just the next step in the life cycle of the document. After adoption begins the implementation phase. That happens rather organically as phone calls and permit requests come in. When staff's implementing the code, we're also evaluating the effectiveness of the code. We're looking at what's working and what areas could be improved. We had talked with City Council that we anticipated taking forward revisions before the end of this year. Here we are today with that, and I can say that the changes fall into roughly one of two categories. Code that was from the previous zoning code that we believe is necessary and that should be carried forward into our current zoning code. And then changes that are really revisions to new code language. So what we don't have really are essentially new code language. So we're not introducing new zoning designations. We don't have any proposed changes to the zoning map. In my discussion with Planning Commission last month, I was going to categorize these as a little bit more minor in nature than what staff was anticipating, and that they were minor in nature, and Planning Commission agreed with that. They actually said after reviewing it before we began our discussions that they were pleasantly surprised at how minor these changes are. Again, they can be brought into one of two categories. The first category being language that was in the zoning code that we had adopted and that we replaced. And those changes, or about half of the changes, the first 8 ordinances on there, is almost essentially a word-for-word replacement. Again, bringing that forward. Highlights of those changes would be, I would say, when I say highlights, being the most impactful to our external customers and our internal customers, is really some language that City Council had approved in the last year or two, sort of in the post-COVID time frame. Staff was before City Council, and we presented a number of changes that had related to signage and also to setbacks for accessory structures. and to fencing. And some of that newer code language did not get carried forward into the the new zoning code. So again, we would like to move forward that language. And what does that language entail? Well, for accessory structures, we had language, or we had discussions, and the language was changed. Accessory structure for a residential district would typically be a shed or a gazebo, something of that nature. And the code was changed to allow that in most zoning districts down to 5 feet. And so one of those new zoning categories, it still said 10 feet. So again, it's just changing it back to something that council had approved a couple years prior. For signage can obviously impact a lot of entities, our nonprofits, our businesses. The changes there are very minor in nature. One is just clarifying that temporary sign permits are not required for properties that are zoned conservation or restricted institutional. Those are properties that are typically parks, religious institutions, government offices, things of that nature. Clarifying that a permit is not required. That was the case in the old zoning code. So again, we're going back to reinstituting some of the old language, clarifying the permitting process for temporary signs and a couple of zoning classifications. Fences, we had a lot of dialogue back in 2021 about fencing and making some changes. That was our frequent variance request. Again, some of the language that was approved by City Council did not get carried forward. Specifically, that was related to fence height in corner, what we call a corner lot. A lot of changes related to floodplain. That might look rather extensive, but that is all essentially, again, word for word replacement. The floodplain regulation mimics FEMA. They have the guidelines for that. And so the code changes there are just carrying forward the FEMA language that we had in our old code that we need to have back. Other changes are related to the variance process. I would say from a staff standpoint, this is probably the largest change, is to the variance language. And in particular, it's 2 additional approval language. Most zoning codes have similar language to this. We did not in our old code or in our new code. But the new language essentially says, and maybe I'll take a step back. So a variance is a relief from the zoning code. And it only applies to Chapter 11. So it only applies to the zoning code. And we get a lot of variance requests in Gahanna. And essentially, variances are supposed to be for unique characteristics, associated with a lot. So unique topography, unique lot shape. While we don't encourage variances, obviously folks have the right to request them, and so we try to provide guidance, and we try to provide guidance for Planning Commission on what our rules are and what typical variances are and that. And so one area that Planning Commission struggles is trying to accommodate a residential property owner who wants the use of their property, but might be asking for more than really what they need. And so 2 of the code language, one of them, is it the minimum necessary that you're asking for? So for an example, our code sometimes has a 20-foot setback. A lot of times folks will ask for a 10-foot setback, but they actually only need a 15-foot setback. So are you asking for what you need, not what you want? And the other language there for the variance is related to practical difficulty. Again, this is the core component of what a variance is there a practical difficulty? Rather than just I do not want to do this. So those are really core elements of variances, but they weren't specifically spelled out in our criteria of approval, so we're adding those. Some other clarification language, we're changing uses around, very minor changes to our uses. The majority of those changes are to the IM zoning classification, that is the Innovation and Manufacturing District. That is located south of Taylor Road. That is the old Office Commerce Technology District. And that district, we allowed essentially all non-residential uses. If it wasn't allowed there, if chances are it wasn't allowed in Gahanna. When we wrote the new zoning code, there are a few uses that were previously allowed in that zoning that we feel are appropriate, but weren't allowed. And those are animal care and family care. What are those uses? Animal care is a kennel, it's doggy daycare. Family care is daycare. General personal services, that's barbershops, gyms, nail salons, things of that nature. All those uses exist already within that area. So again, we're just adding that back. We're also having new language to allow ground-mounted solar panels in all of our zoning districts, not just a couple of them, allowing them in the side and rear yard as well. That, again, maximizes folks' ability to provide alternative energy sources and allowing that up to 10 feet instead of 8 feet. So some minor changes to that area of the code. And I would say the other substantial change in code, or in staff's opinion, is allowing metal as a primary building facade. That was a new code change, so that was allowed in the old code, but we had changed that after having some feedback. However, since that time, there have been, I think, about 3 metal buildings proposed, and they all were very enthusiastically approved. So rather than requiring a variance, that should become our standard. So we're reverting back to allowing metal to be an approved material on a building. And with that, council, I know that was quick, but that was just sort of summarizing essentially at a very high level the 80 pages of code changes there. Again, for the most part, these aren't new changes that are reacting to us missing something, like allowing new uses in new areas. And that, again, these are really tweaks bringing forward old language that was useful and that benefited our external and internal customers. Be happy to answer any questions and do a deep dive on anything that I need to. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Director Blackford. Appreciate you and your team for bringing this forward, and of course to the Planning Commission as well. I will note that the ordinances under item B are slated for a public hearing on December 2nd. I think with that, I will turn to my colleagues to see if there's any discussion. I think I'll leave it broad on any of the items under B rather than going one by one. Mr. Renner.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Blackford, thank you very much for the excellent work on all of these. The variances, it definitely got to be exhaustive work to actually think through all the details. But you know, one I'm very grateful for is the reconsideration and adding permitted use for the ground-based solar. So thank you very, very much.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Mr. Renner. Any other discussion? Ms. Bowers.
Thank you, Mr. Blackford, and I'll echo Mr. Renner's feedback on my appreciation for the ground solar allowance and amendment here. I do have one question to 1111.05 on signs. Just I guess a clarifying question under section H or paragraph H, wall sign. This is involving a mural on the side of a private structure. And I guess I'm curious if it says the city may designate a wall sign as public art mural as long as the language is non-commercial. And so I guess is there somewhere else in the code, or is there a review process or criteria that outlines that process on that designation process for this private art?
Great question, and I have not found that language yet, but it does sound familiar, and I would say, though, that no, there is not. So that's code language that allows for an internal mechanism, but that internal mechanism is not established in code, and I will say that I have not been approached to, or our staff has not been approached to set something up at this point to make that determination.
Okay. I would just, I guess, identify that as perhaps in your next round as something that we can look at from a process perspective. We have existing private art murals, and I would anticipate some of those are going to be refreshed in coming years, so.
Absolutely. We most definitely can.
Thank you, Director. Yeah, that's all I have.
Thank you, Ms. Bowers. Director Blackford, could you speak to, I guess this would be ordinance 83-24, the revising the penalties and the changes there, and I guess I would ask the city attorney if she's had an opportunity to review those as well.
Yes, and my apologies for not clarifying that, but this language did come from our friends over at the attorney's office, so. Yes.
Yes, this is correct. I did recommend a code change to change the penalties to be a unclassified misdemeanor, which is still not a jailable offense, but it is still a criminal offense that would carry a higher potential penalty of up to $500 maximum fine per violation, and that would be within the discretion of the magistrate once it's filed as a criminal charge.
All right, thank you both. And then the last question I had, and truthfully, it is only a question given the wonderful presentation we had from Mr. Speck in the recent weeks. Has there been any consideration regarding parking requirements and the number of parking spaces that are required for various uses?
Yes, and I would say that that was something that at a very early on in the code rewriting process, staff was maybe optimistic that we would eliminate parking requirements because some of the more progressive zoning codes have eliminated minimum parking requirements. Some of the more progressive codes have maximum parking requirements in their place. But after some preliminary discussions, and I will tell you this happened years ago, and I can't remember what group it was or who it was that was not a well-received. It was deemed maybe a little too problematic to go to nothing. But I think what Jeff Speck's point of zoning codes have arbitrary numbers associated with parking, and so that was the thought process, but perhaps behind removing them. I will say that that's certainly something that can be evaluated in future code changes, and I think that's something that staff and probably most external customers would appreciate, but I think, like Mr. Speck said, I think the market usually dictates what an acceptable level of parking is for these uses, and maybe it's not as necessary as it once was.
Yeah, I can appreciate that, and I don't think I would be advocating for a removal of parking requirements altogether, but if you could maybe put that on your list for potential consideration of giving it a second look, since it sounds like it's been a while.
Yes,
So,
most
I
definitely.
think I'd appreciate it. Any other questions or discussion for item B? All right, seeing none then, this will be on for first reading on November 18th. As I mentioned earlier, a public hearing and vote on December 2nd. Consent agenda, or can we do consent agenda if we're having a public hearing? Okay. Are folks okay with the
It's my
consent?
preference, because there's public hearing, that it stay on regular agenda
Okay.
instead of it being on consent.
All right. Regular agenda then, please, Jeremy.
Thank you.
All right, thank you, Director Blackford.
Thank you all very much.
Appreciate it. Okay, next up, if you'll turn to page 3 of your agendas, and it's not very frequent that we have a page 2, let alone a page 3 at committee, so. Next up, we have items from council office. Mr. Clerk, I'll turn to you for this first one for a notice from the Division of Liquor Control.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This is a application for a new permit for Sexton's Pizza LLC, doing business as Sexton's Pizza, 943 East Johnstown Road. The Division of Police has no objections to this. There's no history. This is an internal transfer. So if there are no objections, I will go ahead and email the notice back to the division.
Any discussion from my colleagues? All right, seeing none, thank you, Mr. Clerk. Next up, we have a joint resolution and proclamation designating November 17th, 2024 as World Day of Remembrance for Road Traffic Victims in the city of Gahanna. And for this, I'll turn to Ms. Bowers.
Yes, thank you. We received an invitation from a well-known advocate here in Gahanna, Sharon Montgomery, along with Ginger Tornace of Friends and Family for Safe Streets Columbus, that we join them in taking action to recognize World Day of Remembrance for Road Traffic Victims in the U.S. We also received a model proclamation, which was revised by council office staff Jessica Hiltz, and in collaboration with the mayor's office on identifying Gahanna-specific data for this. There is an event on November 17th coming up this Sunday from 1 to 2 o'clock at Washington Gladen Park, which is at the northeast corner of Broad Street and Cleveland Avenue, to recognize World Day of Remembrance for Road Traffic Victims. I anticipate that we would then send a copy of our resolution to Ms. Tornase and the organization so that they could communicate that Gahanna had joined in this recognition. I do not anticipate there being a ceremonial presentation on the 18th. Anything else, Madam Mayor, on this item?
No, I think you covered that. Thank
Okay,
you.
thank you.
Great. Thank you, Ms. Bowers. Any discussion for this item? All right, seeing none, our consent on the 18th, all right? Great. All right, thank you. Next up, ordinance 88-2024, an ordinance to amend Gahanna Codified Ordinances, Chapter 151, Parks and Recreation Department, Section 151.03, Administration, and Chapter 153, Parks and Recreation Board, Section 153.01, Creation. I don't know why I decided all of a sudden to read the whole thing, but there you have it. And I think for this one as well, I'll turn to Ms. Bowers.
Yes, thank you. That comes back to me. As you'll see in the memo that's been attached here, over the last, I guess, year to 18 months, both the administration, the city attorney, and I think our council office have been reviewing board and commission appointments and processes and our ordinances, and just, I think, overall looking at aligning our legislation and our charter, our ordinances with best practices. In that process, we identified some opportunities to improve Gahanna Codified Ordinances 151.03 and 153.01 related to the Parks and Recreation Board appointment. In our research, we identified that the current arrangement is non-standard and not really being replicated in other communities. So the proposal that's in front of you would have retained a resident employee, as is in the current code, on the Parks and Rec Board, but would have standardized the term to a 3-year term, which is consistent with the other board members that currently serve on Parks Board, and would have changed the appointing authority to Gahanna City Council versus it lying with the Board of Education at this time. So after this proposed legislation was introduced and provided to the school district for comment and review, the feedback that we have since received is that the district does not wish to participate or have an employee participate on the board. And so the request has been to remove this language altogether. In terms of process, what I would suggest that we do is that I would not advance this legislation itself to first reading, but introduce fresh legislation starting on the 18th, that we will be able to move forward with the same timeline as stated in this memo, but that it would eliminate the district representation on the board and convert that 4th seat simply to a council appointment. And so we would still be able to maintain first reading on the 18th. It certainly can come back to committee for further discussion on the 25th, and then have second reading and vote on December 2nd. It would then create a vacancy, if adopted, that council would fill with a term starting January 1 of 2025. And so I would recommend that we post that position, and then if this amendment is adopted by council, that we then interview candidates in December and make the appointment on January 2nd. If there are any questions, I'm happy to take them, but there has been discussion with Board President Kara Coates and with the administration as well on this item, along with the city attorney.
Thank you, Ms. Bowers. Any discussion on this item? Mr. Schnetzer.
More a question, I suppose. Has there been any discussion with the school district about maybe making their recommended individual ex officio / non-voting? just, just kind of thinking that having their input as part of that decision-making process could be helpful, even if it's not formal by casting a vote.
The feedback that I received is that the desire was to remove a statutory position altogether, and that there already exist other and ample opportunities for meaningful collaboration in other ways. There's a great relationship and good dialogue that already exists between the Director of Parks and the district, between the mayor and the superintendent, and then among council and the school board. So I think that the belief at this time is that those conversations and that collaboration can happen on an as-needed basis. And certainly those Parks and Rec Board meetings are public meetings, and would certainly welcome and include the district for further discussion as needed.
Any other discussion? I think for my druthers, I'd like to have it come back to committee on the 25th after we have the introduction and first reading on the 18th.
Perfect. All right, we'll have that legislation to you then on the agenda for the 18th.
Thank you, Ms. Bowers. Next up, letter D, items from the mayor's office. We have a joint resolution and proclamation designating November 30th as Small Business Saturday in the city, and I'll turn things to Madam Mayor.
Well, correct, that's pretty straightforward. We do have the a joint proclamation for Small Business Saturday. This is a proclamation I have issued for a number of years. I'm pleased to join with council this year in a combined recognition of the many diverse small businesses that comprise our economic landscape. November 30th, 2024 is Small Business Saturday nationally, a day that was set aside, I believe, first back in 2010 to really encourage folks to go out and support their local small businesses as part of that weekend when holiday shopping tends to kick off. So here in Gahanna, we have 92% of our businesses are small businesses, and they really are the lifeblood of our community. And having this recognition is an opportunity for us to shine a spotlight on them and encourage our residents to go out and support local as they do their shopping, not just in November and December, but all year long. I have provided a draft of the proclamation, because that's faster to say, to Councilwoman Padova, certainly with her representation on the CVB board and their promotion of local businesses. Appreciated her review of that. I don't believe she had any comments. Nope. All right. So my office is currently working with one of our small businesses to have them present here next Monday for a presentation to be announced there once we have that finalized, details finalized. But this would be on the agenda for next week for vote and presentation.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Any discussion from my colleagues? All right, seeing none, consent for this item for next week. Thank you very much. All right, next up, we have items from the Department of Public Service. We have one item here regarding utility rates in Title IX. Senior Deputy Director Wybensinger.
Yeah. Well, good evening, Council. I'm back for the annual update to Title III Public Utilities. Subchapters will be Chapter 9. What we're going to do today is just outline the rates. All right. So starting with Title III Public Utilities, annually we're required by code to look at certain sections in review as it relates to utility rates for water, sanitary, sewer, storm sewer, refuge, things of that to ensure that what we are charging for the services allows us to have a financially sustainable enterprise operations along with our funding, and to make sure that we are competitive amongst the, let's say, the utility providers. To begin with an overview, the City of Columbus Public Utilities at their annual their Sewer Water Advisory Board in October, we're projecting recommendations for the 2025 budget. This includes a 6% sanitary sewer increase to their customers and 7% increase for water rates. Additionally, the eligibility threshold for Columbus's low-income discount program is going to increase, which is good for our low-income residents. The discount is going to be going up to a 25% discount, and it's going to be based on a 200% federal poverty level. That's up from 20% at 150% previously. So what that basically means, residents that have a weekly income of $900 now up to $1,200 would be eligible. These changes reflect some broader trends projected in upcoming years. As a reminder, the city worked with Baker Tilly in 2022 and 2023 to conduct a utility rate study to make sure that we are examining from those years all the way out and coming up with a cost forecasting model through 2030 to make sure that we are trying to stay ahead of the inevitable curve of cost increases for increased infrastructure projects, operational costs. So the results of the rate study, we began implementing last year. If you recall, last year we had a larger than normal water fund increase to kind of catch up on our capital for our water projects to ensure that we could maintain a solid water maintenance program. Based on the SWAB October meeting, again, Columbus is anticipating sanitary sewer to peak the charges to us around 7% for sanitary by 2030, and up to possibly reaching 15% for water by that time. Not concerning numbers yet, but certainly something that we have to continue to keep an eye on. As again, what we are trying to work on our forecasting model is to reduce rate spikes for our residents. So what we're proposing for this year is a net overall is a 4.5%. That includes our water operations, water capital, sanitary operations, sanitary capital, Columbus consent order, stormwater, and refuge. That's why the percent looks lower than the 7 in the 15, or excuse me, the 6% for sanitary and 7% for water that you would anticipate. It's kind of spread out amongst all of our collections. So what does this mean for our residents? We try to encapsulate it every year as to what can a resident expect on their utility bill. This equates to about $5 a month total increase for all of those buckets that I just mentioned. Based on based on a 4,000 gallon average month. So that would be roughly a family of 4 would utilize that. You use less than, of course, you would save more. Again, even with our adjustments, as we're trying to really make sure that we're looking at our fund balances, our encumbrances, future projects, future operational costs that we know Columbus is going to be pushing to us, we are still falling middle of the pack of Central Ohio when it comes to these types of services, and really looking at other master meter communities like Bexley, Reynoldsburg, Obetz. We are still forecasted to be lower than the other 3 when it comes to master meters. So I'm going to kind of dive a little bit deeper into, it's a little bit more on this year's ordinance than in past years, and kind of talk a little bit more about some other code changes that we have involved in there.
Can I ask one clarifying question just really quickly before you move forward? When you say that we're lower than other master meter communities, do you mean in terms of price or in terms of gallons used?
So it would be price.
Okay.
So what we're looking at is we base it off of a 4,000 gallon usage household. And then we will look at what is their cost for water, sanitary, and CCO is what would go through Columbus.
So pricing-wise, Gahanna is still kind of what, your phrase, middle of the pack in terms of other suburban master meter communities? Okay. All right, thank you. I appreciate it, Director.
All right, and I think Mr. Schnetzer also had a
Yes.
question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Weibensinger. Just want to make sure I heard you correctly in regards to, there's a couple sentences in the report that we are anticipating a 7% increase in, I believe it is sanitary sewer by 2030.
So Columbus is putting out that their expectations would be around a 7%. Not necessarily an average, but it could be a peak. They're coming in this year, they came in at, was 6% for sanitary. Again, with water, they're coming in around 7, but they could anticipate, based on future projects, that we could get pushed out a 15% increase. And a reminder, 80% of our cost is what Columbus does. So 20% is what we control internally with operations and capital projects here.
And then you just answered my next question was going to be what essentially is the main driver of that? And it sounds like we are, no pun intended, but downstream of Columbus in this whole process. So when they raise their rates, we necessarily have to raise ours. Okay, thank you.
So kind of moving into some of the specific code adjustments. The first code we're looking at is we're doing some revisions to the Water and Sewer Internal Review Board. Primarily, we're re-examining the chairperson. Under current code, the chairperson is the Director of Public Service. The way that it's set up is if the Director of Public Services department cannot settle it within the division or the department, it then gets escalated to the Water Review Board, which is then chaired by the Director of Public Service. So we are looking to realign that so you have a higher level of appeal. The questions? Okay. And then also some clarifying language in 919.03 and 04. On the sewer side, in section 921.11, we are recommending the update to the sanitary operational rate. That would be raising it to $10.28 per 1,000 gallons. That would be up from the current rate is $9.18. This is going to be our biggest impact, which is causing the main driver right now, is to make sure that our sanitary operations are on par with where we need to be. The capital improvement fund will remain. We did do a movement last year on that. So the sanitary capital fund will remain the same at $1.53 per 1,000 gallons. Additionally, to comply with the Columbus's CCO or the consent order, we are looking to increase the cost per ERU. This is for, per family or per household, from $3.55 going up 18 cents to $3.73. And again, that section also has some clarifying language as it relates to how we do our billing schedules. If you read the previous language on monthly versus quarterly, we wanted to make sure we put some clarifying language in there that made it a little bit more clear. We do have the ability to go quarterly and monthly or monthly. We currently operate in monthly. And then section 927.17, stormwaters. We are doing a proposed adjustment to our ERUs, our equivalent residential unit definition, our square feet, our calculations of how we come up with what an ERU. They would be adjusting it from our current ordinance is 3,064 square feet, adjusting it to match what Columbus charges for, or what they calculate for an ERU. And again, this would be no impact on residential. This would be on our commercial to ensure that we are matching what Columbus ultimately is using their calculations for their CCO as well. Section 927.21, again, we are just modifying that language. It had a unique section of its own. It referred back to the Water and Sewer Internal Review Board, but then it had its own protocols for the appeal process. So what we're doing is modifying that so it matches the same for water and sanitary and storm now. And then section 929.12, as it pertains to our water rates. Again, we're adding some clarifying language around the definition of supply cost and introducing a rate clarification for what we consider our access customers. those that are using over 3 million gallons monthly. Or, yeah. Again, in 2025, there are no rate adjustments being recommended at this time for our water operations or water capital. And again, changing language to make sure that low-income discount change from 20% to 25% gets included. Section 93306 is the backflow prevention. Minor language adjustments just to ensure compliance with backflow protection requirements. And then the last section we have is section 941.16, our refuse collections. Again, modifying the language for payment schedules, clarifying billing intervals, updating some of the titles. No rate recommendations are being made for the 2025 refuse collection. Be advised, we are at a contract with local waste until December 31st of 25. This is renewal option 1 of 2. We are still currently locked into the same rate that we received in 2022. There have been no base rate increases on that contract. And then we will make a determination by, I believe it's May or June of 25, whether we stay with the consortium and utilize the final renewal option in 26. Again, that renewal option is the same rate that we established in 2022. So again, yet another no increase to our refuge if we were to stay that route. So in summary, I know there's a lot of changes or a lot of updates that we've kind of put through here. What the administration is respectfully request council to pass an ordinance to authorize to propose code changes and fee schedules, and to ensure that all these code changes its fee schedules are active by January 1. We are requesting that it is approved under emergency. Take any questions you have.
Thank you, Director. Mr. Renner.
Thank you. Corey, thank you very much for itemizing and going through all that lengthy detail. On the 3 million gallons change, I definitely applaud you for taking a look at that. Heavy users are not, in my opinion, and not just in Ohio, but all the way through the country, and are not paying their fair share. And so thank you for looking at that. Why 3 million? Can you explain to us what analysis or what you did in order to say 3 million versus 1 million or 2?
So for this code, it was already pre-established at 3 million. It was
The code
9
was,
for quarterly, and now it was established at 3.
Okay.
So we did not do, part of our analysis was not reevaluating that 3 million. It's something we could continue to look at, but utilizing the current section of code and utilizing that as the baseline still.
Okay.
Yeah.
I would, I don't know if you guys are interested in, but definitely please look at that and see if that needs to be adjusted. But thank you.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Renner. Any other questions or discussion? Mr. Schnetzer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you again, Mr. Weibensinger. Just want to go back to I think it's called the ERU, the Equivalent Residential Unit. So if somebody has post-proposal, if someone has a 2,000 square foot house, they can expect to pay the 514?
Residential is not affected by the change in this. Residential is 1 ERU for their house. This would be when we do the calculation of impervious payment for commercial. That's what this change would do. We are very generous with that 3,064 compared to the state average is around 2,800. City of Columbus is 2,000. Since City of Columbus uses the baseline of 2,000 when they calculate what they are charging us for the Columbus consent order, we felt a right to match ultimately. That ensures that is going to the commercial and not residents having to pick up any variance in that.
Understood. Thank you.
Ms. Bowers.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Weibensinger. I guess I'm just, truly just an a question. Could you help me understand why we would, we're anticipating an increase in water rates from the city of Columbus, and we're proactively or preemptively setting those rates in anticipation of those increases?
Yes, so our cost forecast amount is based upon Columbus maintaining an 8% increase from last year through 2030 is what we're basing it upon. Last year they came in around 5%. This year they're coming in at 7%. So what we know with the fund balance we currently have, the water fund has approximately, as of this morning, $4.9 million sitting in it. We know that we're going to, for the water side, essentially using some of the fund balance to buy down the rates, but knowing next year that that's sanitary will be a lower ask next year, water will be a higher ask next year, and kind of laddering that approach between sanitary and water based upon forecasted expenditures, projects, things like that. What we don't want to do is have a sticker shock to the residents right up front, because we can tier, we can work this through to minimize that. Now, we also have the ability, if City of Columbus were to come back mid-year next year and raise, we do have the ability to come back to you and say, this has all changed, but this is based upon all the information that we know. And again, providing we do have unencumbered fund balances that are healthier on the operation side, and we're working to grow them on the capital side for these funds.
So the preemptive or sort of the proactive, I guess, would be maybe a less loaded word, but since we're doing this ahead of knowing what those rate increases would be, why? Instead of why not wait and see what the actual rate increase is and then adjust accordingly based on then what we know from the city?
So what we take is the Columbus Department of Public Utilities makes a recommendation to the Sewer and Water Advisory Board, which then makes the recommendation through the budget process for revenue and expenditures.
Uh-huh.
We would then have to wait until the City of Columbus adopts their official budget if we wanted to do that route, to make it official, right? Which would then mean January 1, it would be highly unlikely that we would have these rates in effect. What we are doing is based upon all the information we know. Years past has been valid information with minimal variance, but officially, just like our budget is not approved until you approve it, these rate recommendations are the same as what the Sewer Water Advisory Board would make to Columbus City Council. So we're kind of working in process. The reason we don't come before October, even though we can anticipate what we think, is we do wait for that October Sewer Water Advisory Committee at the City of Columbus in order to understand what is going to be presented in their budget.
And so just so I make sure I understand, so the projection is between 7% and 8% in terms of increase with the City of Columbus's rates?
That is what our forecast model
That's our
is, yeah.
forecast model. So just as I sit here and kind of look at the proposed rates that are being included in here, it looks to me like we're over that, though, in terms of what's being proposed in terms of increase. Am I doing the math correctly? Like if I'm
So-
looking at,
The sanitary is going to be over the 6% that is in there, yes.
but I also see it down in 929.12 water rates. For example, if we just look at the right-hand column, billing rate per 1,000 gallons being $9.55 currently, that at 8%, that if we add 8%, it'd be $10.31 instead of $10.73.
Sorry.
It's okay. It looks like the biggest jump would be the capital improvements, that we're increasing that by I mean, that's 300% increase.
Can you repeat your question? I'm sorry.
Yeah, so 955 is the billing rate per 1,000 gallons.
955 would have, yes, would have been last year.
Uh-huh, and by my math, it was $10 and what, 41? 31 cents, 10.31, instead of 10.73, which is what's proposed.
So we're going,
Are you adding so you got the base rate of the 965,
919, yeah,
919 plus the 36 from last year would get you to 955.
correct.
And then this year it would be the 965 stays the same. The $8 stays the same, and then the 1073 stays the same for water rates.
Oh, I see. So this red line includes last year's increases.
The top row of the chart, that is last year's. That's our current rates. The one below is going from 24 to 25. So water in that particular case is static.
So this year, 2024, we increased by about 9% in 2024?
I'd have to go back and look at my notes, but it was a heftier increase. It was a little over $7 per household per month. This year is around $5. So I can go back and look at it, but it was a heftier increase last year to ensure that we caught up.
Yeah.
Primarily our water capital went up, I believe it was 150% to ensure that we could fund a sustainable capital maintenance program.
I think my sensitivity around this is just that I certainly don't want to increase our capture unnecessarily. I would rather that we pass along the direct cost increase to residents and no more, and then where we need to identify capital improvements for water and sewer, that we identify that in other ways rather than through water and sewer billing.
So I just want to clarify, for the water though, there is no change. Is that
So,
25 from 24 to 25, there's no proposed changes, no increased cost to our residents for that.
yeah, I'm sorry, and I was misreading that chart because I was reading the red line and misreading that, because the red line apparently was a remnant from last year. So I was misreading that water line. So, but looking at 921.11, there is an increase in that. So I guess I'm just more broadly, I'm just sharing that I don't want us to have to pass along any additional costs to our residents than what it costs us in terms of the increases that we're seeing. I would much rather see us be able to identify revenue sources in other ways.
So for enterprise fund, I mean, we do utilize, we got some ARPA grant funding that we utilize this year. A lot of times with enterprise funds, there's not a lot of grant activity involved. It's more of low interest loans that can be utilized as well. But a lot of this is ensuring that. So last year, the reason the drastic change in the water capital was that in getting with our engineering team of what do we need annually to build a solid water infrastructure maintenance program, that's why we had to kind of move to those numbers to say this is what we need. The intent and the reason why the total increase is only 4.5% as opposed to 6 or 7 as what Columbus is pushing us, is we are looking also at, in this year's budget, you'll notice utilization of TIF funds more than we probably have in the past. So we are trying to utilize every available fund, but also not arbitrarily requesting more to the residents than what we would need.
And I'm not suggesting it's arbitrary. I certainly don't want my questions to make it sound like that this is an arbitrary increase. I absolutely recognize that the revenue that's generated for the Water and Sewer Capital Improvement Fund is not arbitrary and is for needed infrastructure improvements. My concern is on folks are concerned about their ability to, make their paychecks meet their needs, right? And so as we're increasing water billing, even though it's for very legitimate purposes, whether it's on the sewer side or on the water side, it affects their pocketbooks directly. And so I think what I'm trying to articulate is that if there are ways for us to think about the capital improvement fund as a source to be able to invest in other infrastructure improvements. If we're able to think about, again, other TIF funding mechanisms, that's really where my concern is coming from. And I appreciate the discussion on this. So the only other question I had is, I noticed that there is no amendment to the reporting process to council. Do you want to speak to that schedule?
With the Water Sewer Advisory Board?
Yes, thank you.
Yep, so the process remains the same, is annually by December 31st, I believe is what the ordinance says, is we provide a report to council of certain criteria, which would basically be what went before the Water and Sewer Internal Review Board, and ultimately what was the outcome. Yeah, so currently for 24, there have been no Water Sewer Internal Review Boards. If you'll recall, last year in, I believe it was either late November or December, I submitted through council's office. We had maybe less than half a dozen in 23, but in 24, we have not had the board meet.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Ms. Padova?
Thank you. Kind of piggybacking on Councilwoman Bauer's question, it seems like what you guys are trying to do, and correct me if I'm wrong, is that you know the rates are going to continue going up through Columbus, and so we're increasing them kind of as little as we can, but still increasing them so that then the next year it doesn't become a larger increase. Is that?
Yeah, yes, so we're trying to leverage, what we don't want is to present a 15% increase when you know it's coming. If we can continue to slowly leverage towards that. If we leverage an 8% and it never hits an 8%, then that helps us where we don't have to do continual increases beyond where we're at. The fact of the matter is it's getting expensive to have water. And I don't anticipate it to get cheaper. What we can try to do is keep it as consistent of a price to our residents as we possibly can, knowing that ultimately it is getting more expensive for us as Columbus's customer.
Thank you. I think we probably all share the same sentiment as not wanting to raise the price for our residents on something that they need. But I do appreciate the administration's efforts to make sure that that rate hike doesn't become 15% in a year, rather than, and instead doing something a little bit at a time, and hopefully it will be less than what we eventually get to. So, thank you.
Ms. Jones?
Actually, I think Ms. Padova got it, but I guess one sort of add-on to that. So I know that we're proactively kind of gently increasing, but we don't know, I guess, the exact rate you're saying from City of Columbus. Is there possibility, or what is the risk until we know more definitive, I guess?
So again, we know what is being presented to Columbus City Council in the budget, similar to what we know Joanne or Director Burry has presented for our enterprise revenue and expenditures for 25. There is a chance that before council votes that could change, very similar to the City of Columbus. For these types of projections, it is highly unlikely that it'll change, but there is also, until it is approved, there is always a chance. So what we do is we base it upon to make sure we can forecast out, because there also is some legwork involved for us to prepare our systems to be ready to start billing by January 1 as well. So waiting until, let's say, the second week of December when Columbus officially makes it, is really going to put us into a no-win situation when it comes to our internal billing processes.
Okay, and so it's that January 1 time. I mean, that's the real stickler. Okay, thank you.
Any other discussion on this item?
I'll just say, thank you for clarifying that question, because I didn't quite understand that we were basing this off of what's been proposed in Columbus's budget. So thank you for clarifying that. That helps me understand that it's not just a prediction, but it's actually documented and pending.
Correct, so we have a forecasting model that we're utilizing. We know what Columbus is, what is being submitted to Columbus, which is the 7% water, 6% sanitary. We know that is what is coming.
Okay,
Yes. And
thank
that's
you.
knowing that that falls still within our baseline forecast, that's why we are projecting what we're, or presenting what we're presenting.
All right. Thank you, Director Weibensinger. Well, folks, okay, it's emergencies requested, so on for first next week, and then on for vote on the second, consent, or folks, regular agenda? Regular agenda?
My only hesitation is that Mrs. McGregor isn't here, but I don't know that we could certainly, if it's recommended for consent, it could certainly be pulled
Yeah.
off of consent if needed. So I'm comfortable with consent.
We can go with consent then.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Next up, we have items from the Department of Engineering. We have one item here.
Pinch hitting today for Mr. Comlank. He's enjoying a little bit of a longer weekend, but this is pretty simple ordinance. It's an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into an intermunicipal agreement with New Albany and the Franklin County Engineers Office for roadway maintenance on Morse Road, basically from the US 62 roundabout a little bit further east on the US 62 roundabout to the roundabout at New Albany Reynoldsburg Road. This is a joint project that would be split in thirds, basically. Our third of the project, we're requesting $220,000 to cover our third of the project. I think the agreement requests it's $600,000, so that would be 200 apiece, but we've added a 10% contingency on our side in order to cover anything that may go over. So this ordinance has, my understanding, this ordinance is going to New Albany either tonight as well and or tomorrow, and the Franklin County Engineers Office has already signed off on the contract itself. So the administration is respectfully requesting an ordinance authorizing the mayor to enter into the proposed intergovernmental agreement referenced above. I guess one other note that I should make is that this $220,000 is in the engineering capital plan for payment in 2025.
Thank you, Director. Any discussion of this item? All right.
Real quick.
Yes, I'm sorry, Mr. Schnitzer.
Mr. Schultz, so who would go out and inspect it since there's multiple parties?
The Franklin County Engineers Office would run the entire project.
They would handle the whole thing?
They handle it top to bottom from bidding all the way through inspection.
Makes it easy for you?
Yes, sir.
All right, perfect. Thank you.
All right, any other discussion on this item? All right, seeing none, on for consent on the second then? All right, thank you. Next up, we have items from, oh, he's right there, the Senior Director of Operations. Director, I'll defer to you if you'd rather touch on ordinance 0066 first or give the 825 update first. This is the requested item.
Academy Park?
Yes.
Yeah, Ms. Farrell is more than, she can jump ahead, that's fine. I wasn't sure exactly where I was falling in the order because I wasn't 100% paying attention when you guys slid that in there.
We love your honesty.
Yeah. Good evening, Director.
I guess, Director, do you want to introduce, I guess there was a request that this come back to Committee of the Whole, Chair, if you don't mind me kind of introducing this. There was some concern about the expansion would potentially cut into the field where the soccer goals are set up currently. And so there was a concern about reducing access to field spaces. And so in response to this request, I requested that we add this ordinance back, and graciously Director Farrell has been willing to do so. So thank you, Director.
Absolutely. And what you hopefully have, which will help display what we're looking at in response to any type of addition to the parking lot. As stated, there won't be a negative impact to the playable flex space that's in the greenway. There's an image that will be reflected for the room here in just a few minutes. But what that image is showing is the different types of rectangular fields that could be positioned. It just really determines on how you want to orient the fields. Yeah, the sizes aren't coming up very well on this image, but ultimately what you see is there's one large field that's appropriate for an 11v11 soccer team, and I'll also state that this space is a training space. This isn't often used for gameplay. Now, you ultimately could, and we manage the schedules of fields with our affiliate users. Affiliate users are ultimately the organizations such as the Gahanna Soccer Association, Junior League Baseball, who work with us in order to determine the space and the availability of the space. So we know what the needs are based off of the affiliate users' schedules. But ultimately, this, again, there's a large field, and then it can also be broken down into multiple smaller fields. It just depends on what is necessary or needed for the specific schedule in hand. I hope I'm happy to answer any additional questions if that's helpful, but the image was ultimately to help portray the actual size versus the extension of the parking lot.
And I suppose now that we have the benefit of the graphic, there's a relocation of the dumpsters as well? Is that shown on this image as well?
It is not shown on this image. You did receive an image a week prior. And yes, that is ultimately just to help with the flow of open spaces. So also for the use of those trash receptacles, repositioning them into a more appropriate location is desired.
And from a process perspective, would you walk us through next steps and when an update would come back to council, or when a budget proposal would come back to council and that kind of thing?
Sure. So right now we're in the planning efforts in order to determine the actual concept of the park, to identify the needs have already been identified in response to the improvements to the parking lot, the incorporating a trailhead onto the site, improvements to the shelter as well, which was ultimately determined to progress just based off of this process, as well as we knew that the playground was due for replacement. So the planning effort was to determine the best use of the space. Since we have so many assets in this park that are up for improvements, it made sense for us to look at the whole park and what makes sense to help the flow, help access. This is a space that does get backed up from the parking standpoint. Unfortunately, there are multiple dates, depending on what is happening in the park, that gets backed up onto Cherry Bottom. So just looking at the full site to incorporate the best improvements. So that's really what we're doing now, is to fit all the puzzle pieces together and get the research on the site to make sure that what the actual concept is constructible. From here, we will engage and continue into engineering. That is part of POD's work. So they are doing the concepts. They were or we'll produce 3 separate concepts, and then we'll develop into the engineering from those concepts. So that would be the next steps. We do have the cost estimates. The cost estimates were presented as part of the capital improvement plan. So we'll continue to work, and any amendments to those will, of course, come in front of council.
Okay, thank you. I would just want to reiterate again, and I know you heard this the last time, Director, so just bear with me, but I think something that is incredibly important to me on this project is water maintenance, water retention, or how we're managing runoff, particularly from the increased paved space. And while, you know, all options are on the table, I know I learn about new solutions, you know, weekly. There was, I think, some things shared regarding a water filtration. Mr. Renner might be able to speak better to this, but a water filtration drainage system that was able to be attained through some grant funding that can filter runoff water from parking lots and fits within. So my hope is that as we go back to the consultant on this, as POD works on this, that they really pay special attention to this issue so that we don't continue to contribute to the to runoff issues in the Big Walnut. So thank you, Director.
Wholeheartedly agree. The again, the infrastructure does not have any type of storm features. It is not our intention to move forward without that. So storm features will be included into this parking lot.
Thank you, Director. Okay.
Any other discussion on this item?
No, not consent, so keep it on regular.
Sure.
Yeah, just in case the
this-
Director, or Mrs. McGregor has questions.
Yeah, I'll just note, this did have a first reading on the 4th, so we'll keep this on the regular agenda for next week. All right, thank you, Director. All right, now, back to Senior Director Schultz.
Now it's my turn?
Yes, sir.
I got you.
Thank you.
So this is our monthly, which is almost maybe bi-monthly at this particular point, construction update for 825. I pause on this screen. I'm not going to read the project objectives, but I do think that it's important that we review these, and as we are getting these updates and as we're watching construction activities take place over at 825, that we keep these 10 items in mind and really see these items be borne out in the construction as it happens. I think what you're going to see here tonight is a tremendous, and I think I mentioned this probably the last time, it's probably going to get old for you folks, but a tremendous transformation in the site itself. The amount of work that's gone on in a short 6 months, right? We started construction basically on May 1st, so November 1st would be a 6-month time frame. And where we are today versus where we started on this particular project is night and day. Just by illustration, Joe Collin, our GIS administrator, he's been flying his drone around this particular property for since the beginning. It's some of the images that you guys have seen. And as I was putting this together last week, I had asked him, I said, hey, Joe, can you go out there on Tuesday? Because the building has changed so much from, I want to say it was November 3rd when he flew it till to today. So he went out this morning, and we'll see that in a little bit. Obviously, the graphic that you see on the screen here, this is just a good illustration of the site itself and the different improvements that are going on. Obviously, the darkest blue is the existing building and the existing structure. The next shade of blue is the expanded footprint. The red dots that you see around the perimeter of that building, those are all of the entry points into the building, whether those are staff entry points, secured entry points for PD, or the 3 public entry points that you see off the front of the building, 1 for the police department, 2 for the main city hall entrance, and then 3 for the senior center, and then making a note that there's a smaller entrance around the back. The red line and the red feature that you see is the security fencing that will go in. And then obviously these 3 areas here, 1, 2, and 3, this is the solar array that's going on the property as well. Many of these features, as we get through the presentation here, we'll begin to see some of these things begin to take shape. So a lot of what's gone on in the last, in the month of October, right? So the existing window replacement along the entire backside of the property is well underway. Many of the windows are going in. The existing roof on top of the existing facility has been completed and is now replaced. You can really see in this particular video here, this was just flown this morning, everything that's going on the site. So again, the roof was done. Structural steel expansion, you can see that steel expansion going on off the front of the building. Here is where city council chambers and the new front of the building is going to take place. You can see structural steel being added to the basement of the building, which serves as both the storm shelter and the firing range. And you can also see the sally port being erected. The last slide here is the illustration that's at the front of the building here, but when that slide comes up, remember this picture and then remember what that looks like and begin to meld those two things together in your mind. The domestic water supply into the building has also been completed this month, and then interior work obviously still continues. We'll get to some interior pictures on the next slide here. But some of those things are the basement and the basement walls and slab have all been completed. There's still one small area where they have to drop in some firing range equipment and stuff into the facility that is yet to be completed, but the basement is largely completed. All plumbing rough-in on all levels is well underway and nearly complete. The priority framing on levels 2 and 3, so that basically means the walls, if you would, right? And this is, so most of the walls are fully formed and ready for drywall. There are some areas where, it's missing a section of the wall, and that's just so that they can continue to run HVAC and those things easily as construction continues. That's my next note on there. The HVAC rough-in is largely underway on floors 2 and 3. I think one of the things that I noticed when I walk through the building on a regular basis, right? So the old HVAC system, as an example, back in 1997 when the building was originally constructed, none of that ductwork was insulated, as an example, and all of this ductwork is being insulated, and it just really adds to the quality of the level of construction that's actually taking place on the facility. Electrical rough-in continues, and then again, the structural reinforcement of the facility to make it that essential facility is also taking place throughout the existing structure, and that's been actually complete for some time. Based on the schedule here, we are 34% complete, just based on time and time alone. And then the other note that I'd like to make is that Alfred has recently, just last week, approached us and said we weren't necessarily planning on putting up barrier for the winter months and putting temporary heat into the building, but we really think that we can advance the schedule if we do so. So that's one of the change orders that we're looking at implemented to advance the schedule. I think Miranda was just pointing out to me today that the schedule is for dry-in the building was originally scheduled, I want to say, for mid to end of February. That's been moved up to the middle to end of January. And this barrier and temporary heating inside of the facility will give them the ability to start drywall on about December 1st and really begin the finishing of those interior spaces on both the second and third floors, with the first floor still looking to come together. So one of the other parts and pieces here, the last slide here really is where are we budget-wise? The top summary slide here is this. Remember, we had two GMPs. GMP 1 had a total of 20 million. GMP 2 total of 39 million for a total budget cost of $59.6 million. To date, we've billed 22% of the project, so we've paid out just under $13 million. And then, if we all remember, allowances and contingencies and all that conversation at the time in which we were going through budgets and understanding GMP 1 and GMP 2, just real quickly. Allowances are, just a review real quick, allowances are things that Alfred would have anticipated needing monies for, but they couldn't necessarily extrapolate a full cost on some of these things. Some of these things, for example, would be a wall bracing necessary inside of the basement. How many bars did they actually need in order to brace the basement, right? The structural engineer needed to come out and engineer that, so on and so forth. So there was an allowance put in the budget, which is included in the 59 million. All of the numbers here are included in the 59 million. In order to allow us to continue the project and assume that cost when necessary. So some of the other examples, the grading on this particular side of the building is a little bit steep, so they had to actually add 2 steps and a handrail coming out of the building. So based on grade and those types of things and engineering of the site, that's something that they had anticipated and was covered under an allowance. You also remember the word contingencies. Contingencies are for things that are unknown and come up. So those would be things that either Elford maybe missed and/or that we have requested be changed on the project. One of the examples that I can give there is in the demolition. The demolition contractor, because there was some confusion on the drawings, they actually removed more facade. They removed more facade over on the senior center side than they should have. So we're using some contingency monies to put that back in place because it's part of the design features of the facility itself. All of those, it's primarily 3 buckets for space purposes. I combine the contingencies, owner contingency and construction contingency into 1 bucket. But all 3 of those budgeted amounts total $4.7 million. And to date, we've spent about 7.46% of those buckets, or a total of $356,000 over the last 6 months. Obviously, as we get deeper into the project, the allowance is actually shrink in need, if you would, right? Because as things become, especially when you gut a building, when you remove that wall, you're going to find a condition behind that drywall that may need remedied. And those were a couple of the allowances as well that needed fixed. And then we also were having a conversation with the project executive on the project, Brant Quinn, who's been here before, about potentially looking at some of those construction contingencies at this particular point now that we're 6 months in, and potentially returning some of those. When those get returned, those technically go into the owner contingency bucket, and then they sit there until the project wraps up. So again, this year is, I think when you go out there, I think when you look at that drone video that was taken this morning, I think when you look at that raw image and that structural steel that's going up, and then you look at this particular rendering and this particular drawing, it's very easy to begin to see what it is that the future home of the police department, city hall, and the senior center will ultimately be. So with that, I can take any questions.
Thank you, Director Schultz. Mr. Renner?
Yeah, thank you for that really nice summary. If you're at 22% on October, where do you think that, since you already mentioned certain contingencies and allowances have already occurred, what percent by the end of the year?
22% on what's been invoiced?
Right.
Or are you talking schedule?
I am assuming that's of October.
This is-
So by
yes,
the end
correct.
of December, where do you think it's going to be?
You asked me too quick, Mr. Renner. I want to say that we're receiving maybe April. If I look back at, nope, sorry, we're both drawing a blank. With those pay apps actually come in, and they're fairly consistent in the 5 or 6 pay apps that we've actually paid. So if you were to divide that by that 13 million by 5, that's about what we've been seeing. They haven't really ramped up very much at this particular point. And actually, a couple of the earlier pay apps may have been actually a little bit on the heavier side because they had to order materials, long lead time materials and such that would remain on site. I would think that probably by the end of the year, we're probably tracking at about 35%. But that is somewhat of a guess. Let's see how well I do.
No, that sort of matches what you said, about 34%, so, yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Renner. Ms. Bowers?
Yeah, thank you. A few questions, Director, if you don't mind.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so on this slide, just a couple clarifications. The total, the 59.6 million,
This number here?
that's correct. That's inclusive of the 4.7
Yes,
million in contingency. Okay.
Yep.
And so you said that we're 34% complete just by time, just by schedule.
Correct.
So where are we percent-wise, if you could give us an understanding of in the project, in the actually construction?
34%.
Okay.
Yeah, that's the construction schedule.
Okay.
Correct. So this number here, I want to say that the construction scheduled, it's like 460 days or so, and we're about 160 of those days in. And that's where they're coming up with that 34%. If you did rough math, I did rough math the other day, and it didn't quite match to that 34% as Tyler calculated, our project manager, but yeah, we're right about at that 34%.
And just to make sure I understand, so, but that means that we're on schedule or we're ahead of schedule?
I believe that if Tyler was sitting here and he was answering that question, he would put us slightly ahead of schedule at this point.
Slightly ahead of
Yes,
schedule?
ma'am. Yep. I think if they're able to get the building vapor barriered in and they're able to start drywall, I think that we will be exceeding schedules at the backside of the project. It has been a phenomenal summer for construction. I think it's rained 2 days in all of central Ohio for the summer, which is different problems. But for construction on this particular project, they have lost 0 weather days due to weather, and then they've also lost, there was an allowance, as an example, there's a $100,000 allowance for weather-related delays on a project like this, and they've used 0 of that allowance. They've used 0 of that allowance. They want to use some of that allowance for this barrier and the temporary heating so that they can get ahead of schedule, and obviously time is money.
Yeah. And we unfortunately lost, 2 days due to the incident at the site? So-
We lost 3/4 of a day.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay.
They were back working the next day. Now, I don't know exactly what productivity was like the next day, but they were back on site working the very next day.
Okay, all right. So are we, a total project cost, are we still comfortable at the 59.6?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
And potentially, based on what we're seeing already with contingencies, we might even be on track for under, dare I say it?
We are always cautiously
Dare I say
optimistic
it?
about budgets. Yes, correct.
I did have a resident reach out and ask me if there was any further development on this City Hall site in terms of discussion or progress. And how that, and I ask in this discussion because of how that relates to our new facility and where we're going.
And the easy answer is that it has been discussed and it continues to be discussed. There's some strategies that we're looking to put in place potentially with the CIC in order to determine what maybe is highest and best use on this particular piece of property. And then there's some other discussions that are currently going on. So yes, it's talked about, but it hasn't maybe received the amount of movement that it needs to. But that's something that we need to continue to push.
Do you have an anticipated timeline on when that discussion would come forward to council?
I think that would be premature to say give you any more detail as to a specific timeline. However, it would obviously be sometime next year. I would think by the end of second quarter. As Director Schultz has said, we are engaging in an evaluation that would help us to identify all of the options that we have so that when we do come to council, we can lay them before all of you with options A, B, and C, understanding what the return is to the city and to the residents of the city for each of the options that might be available to us.
Thank you.
All right, any other discussion on this item? Seeing none, thank you, Director, for
Thank
the
you, folks.
update as always. Next up, we will turn to items from the Director of Finance. Good evening, Director.
Good evening. I have 2 items before you, and they're both related to the same thing. For the Public Safety Fund, we had programmed into the budget a partial year funding for the 4th SRO officer. That officer was assigned at the beginning of the year. So we're asking for 2 items related to anticipated shortfall to the end of the year of about $175,000. The first is a resolution for a budget transfer of $100,000 from contract services to full-time wages. That's just one action.
So that would be the resolution. Any discussion on that? All right, consent agenda for that one next week. All right, thank you. Please continue.
Yep. The second item related to that is a request for an ordinance for a supplemental appropriation in the amount of $75,000, and that's for all the benefit lines associated with that salary.
All right, any discussion on that item? Seeing none, we'll put that on consent for the second then. All right. Thank you, Director. Any additional items for the Committee of the Whole? Seeing none, we will adjourn committee, and I'll turn things over to Chairman Snetcher for Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Weaver. Council, we intend to dive right in, or you want to take?
I need a break.
All right, we'll take 5.
2 hours. Thank you.
first.
Welcome back, everyone. Let's commence Finance Committee for November 12th, 2024. We have two items on the agenda for this evening. The first being a Quarter 3 financial report to council. Looks like we're all teed up here, ready to go. So Director Burry, with that, the floor is yours.
As with all quarters, our agenda, we're going to discuss the Q3 results for the general fund, special revenue funds that receive income tax, and the capital improvement fund. We'll give a brief overlook of the financials of the CIP, what our income tax trends are, investments through the third quarter, and then what our conclusions are based on those third quarter results. So first thing that we're looking at here is general fund revenues as of the end of the third quarter. We're at about 86% of the budget, and we have an increase of 10% over 2023. Income tax is right about where we'd expect to be at 75%. We had projected a 4% increase, and that's about where we are as of the end of the third quarter. Also seeing property tax increase as expected based on that sexennial reappraisal, coming in a little bit higher even than the county auditor anticipated, having 120% of what was anticipated. And then, of course, interest and investment income is still turning over more than anticipated as interest rates are remaining high even with the most recent cut in September of 50 basis points. All other revenue for the general fund also exceeding 75% as we just have increased activity throughout the state. Any questions on general fund revenue?
Council, anything for Joanne on that? Mr. Weaver.
Chair, thank you. Is there a reason for the property tax coming in over projections there? I mean, we're in the middle of the year.
So we collected, the last settlement would come in August. We get settlements twice a year, once in March and once in August. And they just came in higher than anticipated. Again, we get our estimate for the year from the county auditor. So I'm not sure if when those estimates were put in place, if there may have been some valuations that were still outstanding potentially. So not quite sure.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair.
Anything further from council? All right, Joanne, back to you.
On the expenditure side, we're at about 52% of what we planned for the year, and we have a 16% increase. Most of that increase you'll see in contract services. Those are the same things that we had discussed at the previous quarter, the 825 property tax, the movement of the risk insurance to the consolidated DAS division, an increase of Board of Election fees are mainly driving those. The next largest increase would be for capital outlay, and that's associated with the new municipal complex. Salaries and benefits, you'll notice, are at about 65%. We would expect those to be more around 75%. We have had some turnover and some vacancies. So we're anticipating, based on projections, that there'll be about a $3 million salary and benefits saving for 2024. 56% of that coming from public safety, which just shows that there's continuing challenges in staffing public safety nationally. Materials and supplies are also up. So this is just based on inflation, and it mainly has to deal with certain areas like employee safety, IT operating equipment, and this general supplies for lands and buildings. Any questions on expenditures?
Council? All right, Joanne, back to you.
So what's this total impact on fund balance once we take into consideration transfers for debt service and the leave payout? We're adding about $6.5 million back to fund balance as of the end of the third quarter, bringing us to about $42 million in fund balance. Of that amount, about $11 million is reserved for encumbrance, and that includes that contingency for the municipal complex, as well as the emergency reserve of $8.45 million. Brings us to an unreserved fund balance at the end of the third quarter of about $22.6 million. That represents about 10 months of operations compared to the 2 months minimum that's required by policy. Any questions on fund balance?
Council? All right, seeing none.
So the next thing that we're looking at here are the 3 special revenue funds and how they are compared to the budget as at the end of the third quarter. So across all 3 funds, we're about where we would expect to be compared to the budget. Income tax at about 78%. Seeing some increases in charges for services for Parks and Recreation. They had a great season this year. And then for the SRO program. On the expenditure side, public safety, seeing that salaries and benefits at 90%, that's what got us to bring the action forward. We realized that we needed that in order to complete the year. Salaries and benefits for Parks and Recreation, 80%, which is expected because they've already completed their season. And then the public service is at that 59% for salaries and benefits. They still are struggling with being fully staffed, but they are still better off than they were in 2023. All of their expenditures look about where we'd expect them to be. Any questions about special revenue and how it compares to the budget?
Council? All right, seeing none.
So the next item that you're looking at here is how those same 3 funds stack up to 2023. You'll notice that the income tax comparisons to 2023, seeing some increases and decreases. Again, that's just based on the change in allocation for those 3 funds based on what their actual operating requests were for 2024. Again, charges for services, seeing those increases there for public safety and Parks and Recreation. And then again, those known increases for salaries and benefits, having the 4th SRO officer added, and then Parks and Recreation had increased their seasonal pools and had added a few positions in 2024. And then, of course, public service, as previously discussed, having some difficulty in filling some positions. At the end of the third quarter, you see the fund balance, unreserved fund balances there all look good for all 3 funds. Any questions about how it stacks up to actual?
Questions from council? All right, seeing none.
All right, so now just looking at the capital improvement fund, similar story, seeing that income tax right about where we'd expect it to be, 78%. Seeing the interest revenue coming in a little bit higher, as we've seen with even our general fund. That is the bond proceeds that are currently invested. On the expenditure side, we're at about 14%, but with those encumbrances, we're at about 86% of the budget. And then looking how that compares to the previous year, we're an increase of 72%. Obviously, a lot of that to do with the municipal complex. Looking at the end of the quarter, we're adding about $52.3 million to fund balance, bringing us to $73.7 million, and of that amount, $65.3 million is reserved for encumbrance, leaving us with an unreserved fund balance of about $8.5 million. Any questions on capital improvement fund activity?
Council, anything on capital? All right, back to you, Joanne.
So this is just looking at, I had to break it into 2 slides. They've been very busy. So this is looking at the end of the third quarter, all of the projects by fund, what's actually been spent and what's been encumbered. So for the capital improvement fund, again, we just went over that $11,065.5. Adding this second slide, which goes through the other funds, we have a total to date of $18.5 million spent in capital and $78.1 million encumbered. Any questions on any of the capital?
Council, anything regarding those 2 slides? All right, back to you.
So looking at income tax, no surprises here. Very similar to the second quarter, kind of what we were expecting to see, knowing that we're continuing to have that economic growth in the area, seeing those withholdings come up. Again, talking about that individual amount, we kind of knew at the end of last year that we were going to see that kind of drop for the general fund because we had that anomaly there for the general fund for those high individual payments. And then net profit keeping up with the economic growth, seeing those increases there. Any questions on income tax?
Seeing none.
Investments, majority of our funds are invested in Star Ohio and other eligible investments. Our portfolio is a little bit north of 4% right now, and Star Ohio is just a little bit north of 5%. So even like I said, with that 50% basis point cut in September, we're not seeing a huge decrease to interest rates yet, and that's not really anticipated until we get into 25. There is still one expected decrease that is planned to happen in 2024. But depending on the economy, the Federal Reserve is going to keep a close eye on that and a close eye on inflation. Any tremor in that may cause decisions to change about when those reductions may happen, when things stay flat. But right now, it's predicted that there's going to be one more cut in 2024, and then as we move into 25, we'll see more of those as the year kind of goes on.
Questions from council on investments? Joanne, just, I guess, two quick questions. Want to make sure I'm reading the image correctly there. So of all of our investable assets, it looks like a little over half is in the Star Ohio Money Market Fund, the balance of that being in individual investments. Where do the bond proceeds lie until they are?
They're in Star Ohio,
Okay.
just because of the fast pace in which we have to spend
Sure.
those down.
Yep. Yeah, that's essentially, you get that same day if you need to, right?
Correct.
Okay, perfect. Thank you.
So looking at the conclusion, as we continue to see growth, we're going to continue to see more demands for our services. So with growth comes additional resources, which results in additional expenditures as more will need our services. So their strategic and development plan will help to address those challenges with growth and how we balance resources and the needs for services, as well as the shrinking area of developable land in the city.
Anything in conclusion from council regarding the Q3 financial snapshot? All right,
All right. That's it. Thank you.
thank you. That brings us to our next item. Continued discussion of the budget. Again, just a quick recap or a quick reminder. This year, we're taking it a bit more piecemeal as opposed to fielding questions for the entirety of the budget. At every one of these meetings, we're taking it department by department. The focus of this evening will be the ask coming from public safety. We've turned in, I want to say, roughly 10 or so questions in advance. And I don't know, does the administration have a formal slide deck as we have had in past weeks? Okay. I assume Director Vollmer,
Yep, thank you.
that is you.
So I think the first, tonight we are doing public safety. The first question is on the ARPA funding, and Director Burry will handle that question.
So the ARPA funding was used during recovery to help offset some costs from the general fund, capital improvement, and utility funds. Those were one-time initiatives that were planned in those funds. So we didn't really use ARPA dollars for anything that would be reoccurring. The maintenance on those items that we used the ARPA dollars from was already programmed into those funds. So it was more using it for those one-time outlays or initiatives versus anything reoccurring.
Anything from council on that item? All right, back to you.
The next slide is just the general fund expenditures by department, and then we'll get into the Division of Police. So for the So for the 2024 achievements, a couple of them the Division of Police has this year is the CAD RMS Consortium with our partners at Reynoldsburg, Whitehall, Bexley, and Grandview Heights. That project is ongoing right now and is anticipated to be completed next year. In addition, the police staffing saw some increases this year and some hard-to-fill vacancies filled. So the promotion of 2 additional sergeants, expanding the SROs, fully staffing all 3 patrol shifts, and then realizing the capabilities of the community liaison officer. The 2025 priorities include the final CALIA Accreditation Award. The division's been working on that accreditation for a couple years now, and they anticipate the assessors being here in the award next year. The CAD RMS, as previously mentioned, is scheduled to go live next year, and then the preparation for police functions to transition to 825 will be important for their priorities for next year as well. The next couple slides are the general fund expenditures and the special fund expenditures. And then there are some questions associated with these two charts. So on page 97, what is the driver of the increase in contract services? It is mainly due to the CAD and RMS along with taser replacements and the flock camera year 2 contract. And then the large jump in charges for services budgeted for the increase is the CAD RMS payments from the partner agencies that'll be coming in. Are there any additional questions on the contract services lines?
Council, anything on those two items? All right, please continue.
The next couple slides are the general fund revenue, followed by the special fund revenue. And then Chief Spence will answer the next question. Will the city have any presence at 400 West Johnstown once all subdivisions relocate to 825?
So with 400 West Johnstown, we will maintain presence there primarily for backup and redundancy of the communication center, for our CAD and RMS system, radio, 911, city data needs, and other technology infrastructure like our call logging equipment. It'll also serve as a backup and disaster recovery site for our public safety answering point at 911. And conversely, 825 will serve as a backup to the MEC Center. And also with the CAD and RMS project, we can jointly dispatch or serve as a disaster recovery site for those 4 other agencies because we're all in the same radio system, same CAD and records management. The investigative services subdivision will relocate from 400 West Johnstown to the second floor of 825 as part of the transition and move.
Will that reduce our footprint I'm assuming the answer is yes, but will that reduce like our rented square feet at 400 West Johnstown?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Anything further from council on that particular item? All right, please continue.
The next section of the presentation is on the 2025 staffing requests. The division has a few. For priority 1 is the communications technician 2. That is a promotion of a communications technician 1 to a communications technician 2. 2 full-time evidence technicians, those are civilian positions. And then on the priority 2 list is the deputy chief of police and then the 50% split of the training coordinator. The next slide has the org chart for the division of police that looks a little different than the other ones just due to the number of folks they have. So the yellow are those requested staffing changes, and the purple is the change from a 1 to a 2. So you can see in that communications technician that is a promotion with no backfill. So the authorized strength of 12 remains 12 for the communications technician. I believe there are a few questions on staffing. One is about the deputy chief. Has the division considered adding another lieutenant rather than a second deputy chief? So consideration was given to that. However, in the staffing study, it talks to the reasons why it's a deputy chief and not a lieutenant. The focus on the second deputy chief is to better divide the administrative duties, strategic priorities, and oversight. In addition, the functions that this deputy chief will do are functions that are at a deputy chief level, not a lieutenant level. In addition, a deputy chief is a salaried position. A lieutenant is a hourly position. So typically what you see too is that the deputy chief is at a cost savings to the city over a lieutenant. For comparable agencies, we often use, it's in the staffing study, but Whitehall has 3, Westerville has 3, and Dublin has 2.
Just to clarify, those numbers are all in regards to the first question of Deputy Chief.
That is correct.
Anything from council on that item? All right, please continue.
And in the staffing study, there is a chart that shows the breakdown of other agencies compared to ours as well. The second question talks about 2 full-time evidence technicians. Can you elaborate on the need for 2 full-time positions to replace the one? So the division currently has the property and evidence function staffed by 1 part-time sworn officer at 30 hours per week. Per our policies and the FOP contract, they are paid at the top step officer rate, which is far more dollars than what a non-sworn or civilian evidence tech would make. The handling of property and evidence from the department is restricted to a few employees based on proper chain of custody and evidence room management. So adding these 2 full-time evidence techs will allow more individuals to have access to the evidence room. And in addition, right now, when that part-time officer is not here, sometimes we're paying officers or even sergeants overtime to come open up that property or evidence room if something needs taken out. At present, the division has 26,000 items within the property and evidence system. And the chief did provide some information from Westerville. By comparison, their evidence and property room has 4 civilian staff. They have a full-time manager, 2 full-time techs, and then a part-time tech. And so at this time, we believe 2 full-time evidence techs are what is needed to run the new property and evidence room at the new facility.
Council, anything regarding that particular item? All right, back to you.
The next question discusses please be prepared to discuss the staffing request relative to national, state, or regional norms. The chief's going to address this question. I would point you back to the staffing study. A lot of this information is contained in there. The police staffing is a lot different than non-sworn staffing, so there are comparisons throughout the state and then these national trends as well.
So we use workload-based staffing assessments, and we do these internally annually, and that's generally solely focused on patrol staffing, which is the bulk of our staffing directed to our patrol operations or field services subdivision. We do have the national averages. The FBI compiles that data. Using our 35,136 as Gahanna population and then comparing that against the uniform crime report from the FBI, the national average is for communities our size, and I believe it's the breakdown is 29,000 to 60,000 residents. They tier communities based on population size. That national average is 2.4 officers per 1,000 residents. We would need 84 sworn officers to meet the FBI national average. Our current average is 1.7 officers per 1,000. National average of total law enforcement employees, so that's sworn and non-sworn, for agencies our size is 3.5 per 1,000 residents. Meaning we need about 123 total employees, and our current average is 2.3. As I mentioned, we do look at our patrol staffing annually through workload-based assessments, but that doesn't take into account the many other functions within the operation of the division, specifically probably the bulk of our staffing outside of field services is in the investigative services subdivision. That's where caseload, case clearance, hours on the case, factor in. So becomes a much more abstract and difficult type of position to quantify, and that extends into the work of school resource officers, the community liaison officer. It gets into a very difficult projection on truly how many staff are needed. So we do those workload-based staffing assessments. There is a mention to that in the Clemens report. They did review our workload assessments over the past several years. There are many different approaches out there. I think there's a closet industry for police chiefs and retired police chiefs. That, we're all trained to either at Northwestern, Southern Police Institute, FBI Academy. We're all graduates of those fine institutions where they teach us to do this and then find good employment in our post-retirement years. So we are able to provide those numbers, but they are mentioned in the Clemens report.
Thank you, Chief. Anything from council regarding that item? Yeah, Ms. Bowers.
Yeah, related to this kind of discussion around staffing, in terms of assessing priority and sort of what was brought forward in this budget, could you speak a little bit to that? So priority of added positions versus what's being held off. Could you speak a little bit on that, Chief?
Well, I think in terms of priorities, we still have vacancies in our sworn staff that we haven't fully realized. So our ask was not, we believe that once we're fully staffed and in terms of our sworn positions, that we're going to meet our workload-based assessments, how much obligated time we have on calls. With over the last several years, looking specifically at the deputy chief position, obviously both the current deputy chief and myself are getting toward the twilight of our careers. We're getting ready to, find gainful employment somewhere else. We're not done yet, though. But looking at the administrative functions of the department as we've expanded, and especially as we take on national accreditation and all of the checks and balances that best practices require, there's a great amount of administrative oversight that comes with that. So that was the focus of the deputy chief. It's also looking at long-term succession planning and what that looks like for the future of the department. Specifically with the evidence function and those two positions, we know that our current evidence tech, which is a part-time sworn officer, he retired, came back to us as a part-timer, where everything from property destruction to just evidence room management, we're pulling from full-time staff, specifically the training sergeant. When we do property destructions, that's a minimum of 2 officers that have to oversee that process. And it's very labor intensive. Frankly, there are a lot of gaps there that we need to fill. We also know that moving into 825, that's a purpose-built facility for property and evidence handling. Our current facility lacks a lot of the storage, the best practices storage requirements, where we're separating guns, drugs, and money into separate storage areas. It requires a level of complexity that we're not used to dealing with in our current facility. So looking at where the gaps are, where we're pulling from sworn staff, and obviously the best use of sworn staff is out doing police functions. So that was the ask of the 2 evidence techs, and again, to provide some overlap. Finally, just on the communications tech position, that's a promotion and not a backfill, but that's also to expand those supervisory roles across the operational shifts. Having a supervisor in the room on the floor is a best practice. It provides good oversight. Also, when our communication center manager is on vacation, out for sick, or at training, there's a level of continuity of supervision across the communication technician ranks, as opposed to pulling like a sworn officer or somebody that is not doing the job every day in a seat, doing that very technical work.
Can I ask a follow-up? Yeah. Thank you for sharing that information and how you kind of arrived at the proposed positions. So if I heard correctly, so the addition of the evidence technician would free up time from other officers?
Yes.
Including the training sergeant?
Yes.
And so does the training sergeant, is one of their responsibilities coordinating training for your officers?
Yes, both coordinating and conducting training.
So we're freeing up time and capacity for the training sergeant, is that thinking about the training coordinator that would be housed here at City Hall?
Sure.
I'm just wondering if maybe that's going to be a redundancy, or perhaps by adding this evidence technician will create capacity within the PD.
So the training coordinator, you know, as we looking at across city hall functions, and that's really the training sergeant is not only conducting training. There's a great deal of work that we do. In fact, all of our in-service trainings we submit off to the Attorney General's office. The city attorney over here helps us with that process, so that every one of our in-service blocks receives what's called continuing education credit through the Attorney General. So it's assigned to basically a course number. In fact, several of those classes that we've had granted continuing education, we've provided to other agencies. So there's a very large oversight process there. There's a very large documentation process. But with the training coordinator specifically, we do a lot of bringing outside resources in. Every year, our legal block, which is 6 hours mandated by the state, we bring in an outside resource for that comes at great expense. But that training coordinator can not only help us with that administrative burden of scheduling that person, but also managing, because we're going to have additional space. Right now, we're hard-pressed to find room for our own staff, offsetting costs by bringing other agencies in. The smaller departments, the townships, they still need that training. It's still mandated by the state, but trying to coordinate all those resources. Another example of where a universal training resource across both City Hall, we just did a complete revamp of our AED, you know, our defibrillators across, and that we worked with Melissa Jackson in HR with that process. But that was to standardize all the equipment. So every one of our AEDs was, whether it was in a cruiser, whether it was in a parks facility, it was all standardized. That took an incredible amount of coordination. That would be beyond our capacity to do across City Hall because we have so many training requirements internally. So I see that position at the city level taking a burden off of us from the administrative standpoint of coordinating training, trying to offset costs by a cost per seat for some of the things that we know we can generate revenue, and then working with us to standardize so we're not duplicating effort. The training sergeant spends a lot of time hands-on with our staff, also coordinating. We have additional training resources. We have firearms instructors, range days. Obviously, as you know, we're going to have a great emphasis on decision-making capability with the simulator and the range. All of those things require a lot of hands-on from sworn staff.
Thank you, Chief. So if we're coordinating or sharing that training time with other entities, other agencies, are they compensating the city as part of?
That would be, again, once we have the space to be able to provide seats, then yes, we would charge a service, and then somebody needs to kind of manage that whole financial piece that frankly we just don't have the bandwidth. We're very thin in terms of administrative support across the department.
Is there since considering what you shared with us about the average of total public safety staff, sworn and unsworn, national average being 3.5 per 1,000 residents, and currently we're only at 2.3. Mm-hmm. Would there be a need or a benefit to having a training coordinator dedicated to PD versus versus there only being one citywide?
I think that's probably a very valid discussion moving into like 26, 27 when we fully realize what the capabilities of 825 are. I think right now it's just playing catch up in a lot of areas. Specifically, we spent a lot of time, not to belabor about the AEDs, but that was kind of a heavy lift for us. So I see it as, a kind of a crawl, walk, run, and getting somebody on staff to help us, guide us to what that potential is, standardize some things across both city and PD operations. Obviously, we spend a great amount of time, in a training environment. I think that's what sets us apart from other agencies when we're trying to recruit. I think certainly there's going to be a need, but we just don't know what that potential is yet. So I think it's a crawl, walk, run scenario for right now.
Okay, thank you, Chief. Thank you.
Chief, thank you so much. On this topic of training, going a bit off script, as you're aware, me and a couple of council members toured the Westerville facility, and they had the fully immersive simulator. Is
Yes.
that part of what you anticipate staff, or I guess one of the appurtenances at 825?
Yes, so we've programmed space. Certainly Kevin's been working on that space. That's going to be a future ask into 26. And actually myself and Corey today met with the Office of Criminal Justice Services to try to leverage resources at the state and federal level to get that equipment paid for. I can't stress enough, those systems create solid decision makers, and there are so many benefits to those systems, especially with our younger generation of officers coming on. They're used to those immersive environments, just through their upbringing, through their gaming, through their educational environment. So that's where they really truly learn. But we've toured other agencies. We sent officers down to Wheeling, West Virginia, that kind of have the latest and greatest when it comes to those immersive simulators. We're going to try to emulate that program that they have in West Virginia. So yes, what you saw, I would say, was the baby version. What we're hoping for now that the technologies have really taken off is the adult version. So we're working on that aggressively. We're hoping that we'll find outside funding. But again, as an example to the question that was asked earlier about the training coordinator, that space at 825, we're immediately next to the airport. I think we kind of overlook the geographical significance of where we can draw and where we can leverage that position in Franklin County. It's my hope with that training coordinator that we can immediately use that space, because the more people that come in the door, the more money that we can offset the overall operation. And will we ever be at a net or a zero? No. But can we make a significant dent just by our own operations, what we've already laid the groundwork for, to make a significant dent in cost offset? I almost guarantee it.
Thank you, sir. Yep, Ms. Bedell.
Having other officers come in from other areas and use the facility and see the facility, do you foresee other benefits, such as officers wanting to come then work for our department?
Absolutely, yeah.
And have a much better.
Yeah. If we're not poaching the best and brightest, we're not doing our job. But what I would say is...
We won't put that in the minutes, Chief.
Yeah, don't put that in the... Yeah. But what I would say is, again, trying to set up, when in Franklin County, there's such a narrow margin between salary and benefits across the agencies. You have to think outside of the box and the things that officers want when they come through the door. What sets you apart? We have some of the best equipment. We have some of the best technology. We have some of the best training programs around. We're very community focused. We have good support systems and mechanisms, both through elected leaders in our community. All those things set us apart. 825, hate to keep hitting the drum. We don't know the potential that it can unleash, and I'm confident that we already have a plan in place. Our training staff has already met We have a written training plan. We kind of emulated a little bit of Westerville. They had this great and wonderful facility with a lot of equipment. But when that facility opened, they kind of came to a stop because they really didn't have a plan in place to fully utilize it. We're going to get the job done in 24, moving into 25. So when we hit the keys and the lights turn on, we hit the ground running.
Chief, I'll just add that in recent days, I had the opportunity to speak with one of our lateral transfers, and he concurred to what you were talking about with regard to the level of training. He said that it's significantly higher here than at a prior agency, so keep it up. Anything further from council on that particular item? All right, please continue.
So 2025 capital request. Tonight, we're going to be going over equipment. Equipment is found in Section 8 of the CIP. A couple caveats, or actually, sorry, getting ahead of myself a little bit here, but for the police department specifically and for public safety equipment-related items, you're looking at the screen here of things that we've completed in 2024. That includes the installation of the flock cameras. That's the installation of 4 speed awareness signs. It's also the upgrade, the life cycle replacement and upgrade of the radio, what I'm referring to as the phase one project. Things that are still in progress. Chief's already mentioned the police dispatch and record system. And then phase 2 of the police radio life cycle and upgrades portion and pieces is currently underway. And then we're going to look at the next chart here and go over things for 25 as it relates to radios. The capital investment summary here, we're looking at equipment. I'm going to make one note here. So this is the total $2.4 million for all equipment. Tonight, we're only going to be talking about public safety related equipment. Okay, so other things that are included in here are things like EV chargers, wheeled assets, okay? Yes, Chief has many wheeled assets. We're not talking about those wheeled assets tonight. We're going to talk about those wheeled assets when we talk about all of the other wheeled assets when we do public service. Is that next week? So the next slide here, this does represent the entire ask, the $2.4 million for equipment, right? I didn't want to confuse everybody by having something in the CIP and then something different on this particular slide. But basically what we're going to go over tonight is a portion of this $1.685 million that is only related to public safety items, and then anything related to this $700,000 will come, and the remainder of equipment will come next week when we do public service and engineering. I didn't lose anybody there. Good. Okay, so the next slide here is really, it's very simple capital request on the public safety side. We basically have identified 3 different projects. The request for 2025 is for $1.125 million. And these spread, the majority and the bulk of this is for the police radio and system replacement, right? So this is for probably the most sophisticated portion of the radio system itself. Chief referred, when I first started working with Chief 4 years ago, he would refer to everything as a console. Everything's a console or a consolette, and I would be confused because everything was a console. This here is the consoles that sit in the back room and do radio communications in a broad sense across the entire platform. This is the most expensive portion and piece, and like Chief taught me early on in the 4 years that I've been working with him, every time you say the word Motorola, open your wallet. And this is one of those instances. We'll get into some questions around these three items. Let me get through them first. The second item is for 911 dispatch workstations. This is for the installation of the very technical pieces of equipment. We're referring to them as equipment. It's really furniture, though. This is for the furniture that will go into the communication center at 825 Tech Center. This stuff is on life cycle replacement. Generally speaking, it has a life of 6 to 7 years, depending on how hard the staff is on that equipment. So we're seeing this as just part of the life cycle replacement of things that we would have installed over. It's a little bit advanced, yes, but with some of the life cycle replacement of things currently over and installed over at 400 West Johnstown. And the last item on this particular list, and the last item for public safety, is the replacement of 3 emergency tornado sirens that are owned, I guess they're owned by us? They're owned by us, but operated by the Franklin County Emergency Management Agency. And we have 3 within the city here that are at the end of their life, and they need replaced. I will make one note that the one on this particular property may need moved, depending on one of the questions that Ms. Bowers had asked early on, and that's what happens with this particular property. So there may be an additional ask to move that particular siren to a different location in 2025 when the time is right. I will also note that my little note under here that we also did discuss 2 IT projects as it related to public safety. One was the live scan machine, and the other one was, why is it escaping me? It's escaping you too, isn't it? It's late. There was 2 IT projects. We've already gone over those in the IT section of the capital budget requests. Completely blank. We knew what they were earlier today. So with that, I can take questions on this slide, or we can go to the next slide, which is there's 2 questions as it relates to some of these particular items.
Council, anything with regard to public safety equipment? Mr. Weaver.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Director. I think it'd be helpful if you could walk us through briefly how, if I'm looking at the CIP, the updated CIP, and I will take the dispatcher workstations as an example, and seeing what I guess is planned in the improvement plan, and I think it was 185 in the plan, and transcribing that to how we get to what's requested for the budget. And if that is just a, hey, we did some looking at it and we're getting our quotes or doing our bidding process and that number is actually this, or is it a, hey, we're gonna see that X amount of dollars up front this year and the rest is coming in a future year, and how resident us can know the difference in how that works?
So it's, and sorry I always do this to you guys, it is a twofold question, and it actually, you nailed both parts and pieces. In this particular instance, we have a good quote from the furniture vendor that says for X number of positions, it's going to cost $160,000. Which we didn't have that number back in August, so we were estimating on other older numbers. So we obviously estimated a little bit high on what got published in the CIP, remember, which is a living, breathing, working document. We got published, apparently we published $185,000. So this here is the updated number to the CIP. When we have the first round of CIP advisory committee meetings in 2025, this would be one of the adjustments that we would make, that we would say, hey, we're adjusting this project to go from 185 to 160 from a process-related standpoint. There are other instances, just like you kind of hit the nail on the head, where we're still programming, and actually the opposite happens, where if we didn't have good furniture quotes in this particular instance, I would have been asking for the 185, and then at the end of the project term, we would have returned the $25,000 back to the fund in which it came. Equipment is one of the, equipment has a very short duration in time in which you may get quotes, order parts and pieces. I know Chief doesn't feel that way as it relates to vehicles, sorry, Chief. But things like ordering furniture, right, these things can happen at a greater cadence than you can do. You know, we heard about Academy Park earlier today, right? That's obviously has these longer windows, so on and so forth, and the budgets there are a little bit more, until you really bid the project, you don't really know exactly what you're gonna do. But, you know, we can call 3 furniture vendors and get quotes in, 3 weeks. Did I answer both of your sides of your question?
Yes, sir. Thank you.
Anything further from council? All right, please continue.
So Chief's gonna answer what is the term of the flock cameras and is it renewable?
Yes, so the term of the flock was a total of 3 years. There's 24 months. 2024, which was the initial year, and the install, which was higher than the out years, has been completed. We then have the remaining years at 64,000 per year, and that's based on our current flock camera count.
Are you, sorry, Chair? You say current flock camera count. Are you anticipating additional flock camera count?
At present, no. There's no ask. We've looked at some of our gaps in coverage and some things that, obviously as we're very new into this program. I can tell you that we've had a lot of immediate success. I believe the Director of Public Safety has latest numbers on those successes, including just within the last couple of days. But we're still kind of feeling out in terms of where some of our crime hotspots are, where those cameras can be beneficial.
I guess, so I noticed when it first went up right outside my house, I thought, well, chief, but no, my question is.
And actually, we had an incident not right around the corner from your house that we were able to solve with that camera, so.
No, I think it's an amazing technology, and so I guess my question would be, should the city not pursue those in the future, we return the equipment, is my assumption.
Yes.
Okay.
And to further discussion that we had earlier today with Criminal Justice Services, there is a Violent Crime Reduction Act that we're going to pursue in terms of trying to offset some of those camera costs if a grant is available.
Thank you, and I know you shared in a meeting previously, but for the record, could you remind us of how what happens with the data?
The data is stored by Flock. It's only accessed through investigative means that have to be tagged to a specific purpose. It's maintained for 30 days. It's not housed. It's not otherwise stored, and that if it's not accessed, it's deleted.
Thank you, Chief. Thank you, Chair.
Anything else from council on that item?
And the second question is, please be prepared to discuss all planned new equipment purchases or acquisitions for public safety and identify the sources of funding for that equipment acquisition. I think everything that's listed on the previous slide, I'm actually going to go back there. Everything right now is being programmed against the Capital Improvement Fund. I think Chief has illustrated throughout the comments here that we are still actively looking for and pursuing different grants, whether they're through the meeting that he had earlier today or through other means. But at this particular point, the only way in which we can budget a project is with known funds, and at this particular point, all three of these particular equipment purchases would be being charged against the Capital Improvement Fund unless a grant was to materialize and we can offset the cost, these costs at that particular point in time. Through Senior Deputy Director Weibensinger and the management analyst who's in charge of grants, I know that they are out there shaking trees and understanding our 825 project as just one example, and basically looking at that project and saying, okay, where's maybe some low-hanging fruit, and where can we see some of these offsets? Obviously, I think we're largely doing that on a regular basis, whether it's in Parks and Rec or Public Safety. And across the operation. So it's not something that we recognize the fact that there's really one way to grow the pot, and that's through outside funding sources, whether that's grants or other means and methods, in order to do a lot of the good work that we're trying to get accomplished. So again, right now everything is being charged against the capital fund, but that doesn't mean we won't continue to shake trees and see where some dollars could potentially fall out.
Thank you, Mr. Schultz. Ms. Bowers, I think I saw your hand go up.
Yeah, thank you. Not for tonight, but certainly for thinking ahead 2025. I think it would be helpful for us earlier rather than later to understand what public safety PD equipment is already planned for in the 59 point whatever million for 825 versus what's going to fall outside of that. So I would imagine that the firing range, a lot of that build out has been budgeted for, but perhaps the simulator is not included in 825. So I'd really like to make sure I understand that as we earlier rather than later in 2025.
I got you.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the largest cost would be the simulator. I'm thinking, I'm just running through my head, right? And I think that that's one of the things, so when we do have this dialogue in later weeks, right, one of the things we have to keep in mind is that 825 is a construction project, right? So when we start talking about things like simulators, specialty charging rack, if, you know, for maybe body worn cameras or for radios, right? Those things fall clearly outside of construction and walls and doors and those types of things. But you are right that when we do construct a facility like that, like Chief was saying, in order to realize and recognize a lot of what he puts much better than I ever could, there are asks that will come down the road, like things like for the simulator, so on and so forth. So, but no, you're absolutely correct.
Yeah, I just, as we go to a state-of-the-art facility, it certainly is going to have equipment that is outside of the scope of the construction project, but
Correct.
having that understood and sort of within our understanding will help us.
Sure.
Thank you.
Yep.
Anything further from council with regard to the items that we've covered here, the public safety portion of the budget, or I suppose the budget as a whole? Anything else for the good of the order? All right, seeing none, next week, it's a bit of a shortened week, so we have 6 days until our next Finance Committee meeting where we'll discuss public service and engineering. I assume this process is working for everybody. Staff will anticipate presentation with those pre-submitted questions highlighted or answered in there. Given the shortened week, I don't know, does Thursday at 5 p.m. work as far as a cutoff to get those to me? It'll give me an evening to get them over to staff. You guys still want them at 9 a.m. on Friday or before then?
Yeah, as long as they're here before noon, that's helpful.
All right. We also have our first public hearing with regards to the budget next week as well. Jeremy, I assume you have that. Okay. All right. Anything else for finance? All right. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you.